Hello and welcome. Welcome to everyone joining us this afternoon from Cardiff, from the headquarters of SinclairsLaw. And it's a pleasure seeing you here all today. And of course, thank you to those watching at home. I think a few of you have already told me you're going to be watching it at home as opposed to coming here. So there we are, easier, more convenient, but welcome. And I'd also want to introduce you to my wonderful friends. You know them. You know Chris McFarland. Chris McFarland from our law firm.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Chris. And Charlotte.
Hello, everyone.
So what are we here to talk about? The ALN. I mean, I said a moment ago, is the problem in Wales any easier or more difficult than it is in England? And I suspect one of the funny things about it was that when we brought out, or when the Welsh Government brought out the ALN bill, I was talking about my fears in relation to that bill. And I posted a moment ago, about an hour ago, a short post that I wrote back in 2017. And I asked whether or not, do you think that I actually predicted it accurately? So was my prediction correct? What I said fundamentally was, I said that I didn't like the idea of causing conflict between parents and schools because schools were being obliged to undertake the first stage of the assessment process. And of course, I was expecting there to have been some kind of assessment process. And we'll hear a bit later about what's happened to that. But what I predicted in 2017 was that the assessment process and the wording within the legislation seemed somewhat woolly and not particularly that specific. And I was concerned about the language of the legislation. I felt it was going to leave too many people with unmet needs because there's going to be a discretion about what a local authority can and can't do because the law is not really that prescriptive in relation to it. So I wrote about that and I said, this is the worry I have about sort of woolly language within legislation. And furthermore, I highlighted, of course, the concern that I had about the idea of discounting entirely the obligation to do any kind of prescriptive assessment of special educational needs. And of course, Chris will take us through some slides about it a bit in a moment. And furthermore, I was also worried that there would be potentially a case whereby local authorities and parents will go to war ultimately in regards to claims for negligence about people who are not really that experienced or sufficiently trained evaluating and determining the needs of children without recourse to expertise of the kind that you would often see is needed in England. And those were the things I said. And I said that in time, 10 years from now, we're not quite 10 years in, but I said in time, I will come back and look at whether it's been a success. So part of the purpose of today is to see whether or not you're finding it's been a success. I'll be interested to hear what you might think. And also whether the government statistics are saying that there is some success. So with that, I think I'd like to hand you over to Chris, who will tell you a little bit about what he's researched from looking looking at research materials in relation to what's happened since. So did my prediction work out? Let's see. Chris.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, so as Mike relayed, we were discussing the bill, I think 7 years ago now. It's been a while since it's been law, even though it's still only recently been implemented. And we then did a show, the three of us, talking about the new features of the Act, and that was around 2021, around the time of implementation. So now we're revisiting this, and it just so happens that we're not the only bodies kind of revisiting this. And what we're finding is certainly over the last year, a lot of dissatisfaction has come through the petitions, and other bodies are now scrutinising the implementation of the ALN Act because of inconsistencies and difficulties that have come up in the transition from the old system under the Education Act 1996 and the Learning and Skills Act 2000 into the new system. So obviously the purpose of today's talk is just to discuss the implementation of the ALN Act and its challenges, and to update attendees, both here and at home, about the various investigations which are already ongoing into the implementation of the Act and its effect. So when we move on to our next slide, we talk about a recent petition that many of you may have signed that was recently debated in the Senedd. I've extracted the words here but to read out some of the key words, it says, despite only a couple of years into the changes and promises of earlier and better support for children and young people with ALN, more and more ALN pupils are being missed in Wales. There are also issues with consistency and accountability. There is still a large focus on universal provisions as opposed to the holistic approach of person-centred IDPs for ALN pupils. Pupils with mental health/physical disabilities should have equal access to support and quality education, and children under the age of 5 years are being denied support based on an assumption that they will simply catch up by the time they reach statutory school age. When IDPs are produced, schools are able to interpret what is required without adequate accountability and contact of special health therapists for guidance. We call for the rights of all children of the UN Convention of Disabled People to be respected by ensuring a universal code of practice to provide an inclusive quality of education for all ALN pupils, education settings providing properly resourced provisions and trained staff that reach a quality-assured standard of education to make the system fair, reliable, and able to meet ever-increasing demand. Education and health need to work more closely together, and compulsory specialist training and support for teachers and their staff. So I think there's very little to disagree with.
Chris, I was interested in that slide because one of the things that I have always said, that when you're looking at the special needs of a child, the early intervention is absolutely critical. So the idea that they will just simply catch up, I think, is an extraordinary statement for the council, let's say, to relay to parents, particularly when it comes to speech and language delay. If you, or some of the problems you have, mental health too, but basically speech and language, you want to try and get that early because it's the route to learning. So an idea that you simply will catch up, I'm really concerned about that, Chris.
Yep, absolutely. So as a consequence of the petition and the thousands of signatures it received, it was then subsequently debated in the Senate on the 8th of May 2024, and a briefing document was prepared for ministers, and that was really helpful in helping us, in addition to our kind of own practical observations and experiences with the Act, which I think are mirrored a lot in the research of other parties, really develop the information for this presentation. So on the next slide, we've got a little bit of an interactive section, really, for our panelists. So if we can move on to the next slide, we've got a little spot the difference for the two of you. So we've got the Education 1996 on the right, and we have the ALN Act 2018. We have the Education Act on the left and the ALN Act on the right. So our two panelists, eminent lawyers as you are, can you tell me the difference in these sections?
Well, I'll give that to Charlotte because I've been talking a lot. But what I will say is the short answer is yes, there's slight different terminology, but no, not really any difference. Not in terms of definition.
You passed the buck to Charlotte. So Charlotte, anything from you?
Well, my buck is the same as Mike's buck because I don't think there is much qualitative difference between these definitions.
Yeah, there are subtle differences, as you both allude to, not massive ones. I think there are some key differences that we'll briefly touch upon. Okay, so obviously, first of all, the terminology. Obviously, special education needs additional learning needs, but I don't think anybody needed a hint with that one. But also when we look in the provision side of things, just in this second box here, when you're looking to additional learning provision, it's for person aged 3 or over, educational training provision that is additional to or different from that made generally for others of the same age in mainstream schools maintained in Wales, mainstream institutions in the further education sector in Wales, or places in Wales at which nursery education is provided. If you look to the left, just under A there, it talks about it being additional to or otherwise different from educational provision made generally for children of his age in schools maintained by the local authorities. That's really the key difference, is the scope change. So obviously the ALN Act went to further educational colleges, so it's understandable that's not in the Education Act, but really it's the scope. It was more about the local authority area in the old Act, but it's now Wales-wide in the new Act, and that reflects a change that was made in England under the Children and Families Act as well. But substantively, they're exactly the same definition. If anything, having a broader pool of comparators when you see what's made generally should actually mean there's greater consistency, because if one local authority, and this was part of a case that was done against Nottinghamshire, where in England, where essentially they said, well, we've got excellent dyslexia provision in all of our schools. We are the top banana when it comes to doing dyslexia provision. And there was some factual evidence that that was maybe true in comparison with most mainstream schools. But when it came to the court, the judge said, well, That's what you do locally. The comparator is schools across England. In other local authorities, this is special educational provision, so it's still special educational provision. So actually there, what we've seen in England, which has already had kind of time to bed in, and obviously the decisions by the courts that help explain it, it's been very clear that actually expanding the capture of what is made generally to a wider geographical area should actually increase consistency. Okay? All right, so I think it's pretty much the same apart from that. All right, we'll move on to the next slide then. So, despite the near identical nature of these definitions, you'll be surprised to learn, perhaps, because I was definitely surprised to learn, that the number of pupils with SEN and ALN in Wales has dropped miraculously since the new law has come in place.
And yet, Chris, extraordinarily, despite the fact that we were saying back in 2017, one of the beauties of the legislation was that it was going to capture more people.
Exactly right. That was actually the key thing that I, in particular, was a big advocate for, was that you don't have, or you were not meant to have, what they call the necessity threshold. So in England, when you're looking at where all children can have SEN, if they require SEP and they meet the definition, as with ALN in Wales, but not all pupils in England, just like it was the case in Wales, would get a statement or an EHCP. They had to hit a second threshold, which was then that it was necessary for that provision to be made through the statutory plan, which is why we called it the necessity threshold. It's a bit of a shorthand. That's actually not in existence in the Welsh law. So the whole point was, if you had SEN or ALN being the same definition, you would get a plan. Everyone gets a plan. And the distinction would then be whether it's a school plan, for those who may have been on School Action Plus, who do require, ALP, but a small amount, and then the local authority maintain plans for those who would perhaps have traditionally been on a statement in Wales or an EHCP in England. And what we found instead is that actually a third of pupils in Wales with SEN apparently no longer have ALN. They just don't have it. It's gone. So I don't know if either of you have any comments on that. Are we seeing a miracle in Wales? Or?
I think we are seeing. I think what we are seeing is effectively a form of school action plus going on, which is that because everybody thinks of statements and in England plans as being subject to a necessity threshold, what's actually happened is the window has shifted slightly. And so whereas previously, some of the kids who now perhaps aren't, I'm extrapolating, I don't know the evidence for sure, but I suspect that what happens is that kids who previously would have been on School Action Plus but not needed a plan are now just being dealt with in a very informal way within the schools and are not getting the IDP.
Oh, we'll come on to that term in a moment. So for those at home, the words universal provision have become up. So that's a little spoiler alert, little signpost for later you'll come back to. So Mike, your thoughts. Obviously we've heard Charlotte's views that, perhaps we're seeing some informal support.
Well, I suspect that local authorities are now magicians. And they are miraculously, I'm not so sure. This is what I was concerned about when I've been talking about safety valve in England, because the idea in safety valve in England is to try and enhance, or at least to say we're enhancing provision in mainstream schools so that mainstream schools are actually going to be so well equipped. But of course, when the child goes to the mainstream school, has a torrid time at mainstream school, I'm not saying everyone does, but let's say a child does, the problem that they're going to face is because they're trying to demonstrate that they need something different than what a typical mainstream school can provide. And of course, councils are now saying, well, they can provide everything. And not just that, in Wales, we've got teachers who can say, well, actually, I know how to diagnose your child.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're going to have. We can draft plans. And I've got to tell you, in the early days, from my experience, the plans that I have seen have been simply not fit for purpose. They're just hopeless, absolutely hopelessly inadequate. I would go as far as to say they're probably as worthwhile as a piece of tissue paper.
Yeah.
Fit for their purpose.
So the point, I suppose, I guess, to answer your question, Chris, I think it's a mixture. I think it's an idea that there's a promotion of an idea that there's good quality provision in mainstream schools, and that is then leading to a significant drop in the number of children who qualify for plans. And I think in that respect, Charlotte's absolutely on the money on that. She's right.
Yeah. Well, I think those are all very sensible observations. So I'll give you what the then Minister for Education and Welsh Language, then Jeremy Miles, AS, who, like all ministers in the Welsh Government, is now the Energy Minister, because, of course, there's a completely overlapping fields.
Well, and Chris, can I just say that both Jeremy Miles and Lynn Neagle, who is the current Minister for Education, they were too busy to participate in a live event.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
discuss.
So,
I think she was too frightened of
when
the
he was asked to account for this reduction, he wrote this to a Senedd Committee for Young People. It says, SEN has been historically overreported, partly due to the inclusion of a learning difficulty category, which on reflection does not actually amount to SEN/ALM. The new statutory ALN coordinators have reviewed their schools' SEN registered and seen fit to remove some learners with the lowest levels of needs. The ALN legislation was conceived of a decade ago, and the more inclusive approach to the new curriculum in Wales means that some learners who previously required ALP can have their needs met through universal provision. That's the term we heard earlier. We'll come on to it in more detail soon, with differentiated teaching and inclusive education practice. He also, in a separate letter, said that some of these perceived inaccuracies include both the inclusion of those with general learning difficulties, but not ALN. We'll come on to how that's possible in a moment, as well as some learners with short-term needs receiving time-limited support who remained on SEN registers long after the interventions had ceased. So I return to you both. You both gave your thoughts. What are your thoughts on those?
I think it's insulting. That's my view. I think it's totally insulting for a minister who's clearly not on the ground and on planet Earth to say the kind of things he's saying there, Chris.
Yep.
I mean, I deal with, and you deal with, and Charlotte deals with, situations of young people every day in real life. Children are having terrible times when their needs are not being met. And the impact of that is lifelong. Let there be no doubt about it. And as I said, one of the things I said in my statement back in 2017, that we are going to see in the future, depending on what the government might ultimately do with legal aid, but I suspect that we're going to see a lot more people turning to the negligence courts to say, well, actually, look at the way you've wrecked my child's life. Yeah. I might sound brutal, it might sound harsh, but that's my view. Charlotte, what's yours?
So I'm going to start by laying my cards on the table and saying, as some of you may know, that in England, I mostly do work for parents. Some of my work is for local authorities. So I have a view of it across the whole of it. And as a barrister, part of my job is to be independent. So with that in mind, what I will say is, firstly, I'm always wary of suggestions that special educational needs are over-reported, because special educational needs, generally speaking, are diagnosed. And most people have an NHS diagnosis. And if they don't have an NHS diagnosis, most people will have a private diagnosis, which follows NHS. Completely forgotten the name
guidance,
of the thing.
NICE guidelines,
which follows the NICE guidelines. So I am unenthusiastic about suggestions that special educational needs are historically overreported. I should be saying additional learning needs. But until very recently in Wales, we were saying special needs, and I'm quite old, so I hope you'll forgive me for sticking with that terminology. The second thing I would say is that this does kind of confirm what I suspected earlier, which is that what's happening is that there are some learners who do have learning needs who are just not being included in the register. That's literally what this says. Yeah. So that accounts for some of it. I am uncomfortable with... I tell you, the problem that I have here is that with parents, I am not instructed by parents whose children have a mild level of dyslexia that can be dealt with by getting some film overlays or having their papers printed out in a different colour. Those aren't the children that I meet. So I'm prepared to accept that there might be some children who've got a relatively mild level of learning disorder, which is dealt with by some very easy, very concrete adjustment. And there might be an argument, it's not in accordance with the law, but there might be a pragmatic argument for saying if those kids slip off the register, as long as they continue to get the very straightforward and easy provision that they need, does it really matter? But we're talking about a third of children with, we're talking about the number being reduced by a third. And that it feels to me like that doesn't really account for it.
Yeah, so I think that to me is the key, isn't it? Is that you can understand that perhaps someone's been left on the SEN register, or maybe been inadvertently put on the SEN register for the wrong reason. For example, if they had English as a second language, it's been very clearly not a special educational need, but of course that child may require additional language and literacy sessions to help them develop that skill. So you're right, there will always be mistakes in any system. And I'm sure that, yeah, if it was maybe 0.5% or 1%, perhaps you could say, okay, maybe there were some corrections being made. But you say 30%, a 30% margin of error is significant. And the other thing that we put on our slides as well is it's the complete reverse of trends in England as well. So, of course, I appreciate, as a proud Welshman myself, Wales and England are different countries, but I don't think the dynamics between us are so different that you can see the numbers of people with SEN increasing in England and the numbers in Wales being reduced by a third. That is too stark, as you say, a difference to really be explained by simple mistakes. And I also take issue with this general learning difficulties observation, which I kind of agree with you, Mike. I do find that quite insulting because I don't think any parent that I know wants their child to have any kind of learning difficulty, general or otherwise.
And Chris, the idea that it's over-reported. I mean, what are we trying to say? That parents are just simply living in cloud cuckoo?
Well, also, but more importantly, it's usually teachers that identify learning difficulties because they're not progressing in the same way as their peers. So the reality is, as you say, that it's over-reported, but there's no rationale as to what end they were over-reported. I'll give you an example. I mean, my son, I've mentioned it in many seminars, my son didn't speak really until he was 5. I didn't want to believe that he had special needs. I was the last person to report it, if you know what I mean. I mean, I don't think you can change actually what's happening in reality by these statistics. The truth is, Wales is a poorer part of the United Kingdom. And statistics will tell you that when you live within the poorer parts of any country, the statistics will be likely to see a greater level of children who have greater need for help and support. So I think I regard this as a demonstration of the law failing fundamentally to manage the needs of children in this country. And in my view, I've always said, a nation should be judged on the way it treats its children. And I think that the statement made by the minister here is repugnant. Well,
that's my view.
Well, when we talk about, and in fairness, I think reflective of your point, Mike, there was previously a slightly higher rate of SEN pupils when it was still that definition in Wales, and now with ALN it's now approximately 5% lower. So it's 2% higher than England previously, it's now 5% lower than England. So again, showing that shift of dynamics. So again, as we've already talked about, why are we seeing this change then? Okay, let's take it in good faith. Let's take it in good faith, and let's say maybe the minister is right. Maybe it is the case that actually when we look at the new law or when we look at the new systems, perhaps, there are reasons why there's a reduction. Well, let's have a look at some of the other issues that perhaps also explain why maybe those stats are wrong. So the lack of assessment. So Mike, I think this is when we're, regrettably for me, because I don't want to give you credit for it, but you predicted this one correctly. I was a bit more optimistic about the ALN Act. And
do you remember that, Chris? We did have that debate.
I remember.
I said, this is just rubbish. This law is rubbish. And you were saying it's good,
I felt that they were good parts.
And do you know what, Chris? The funny thing, I gave that post. Look at my post that I wrote on Facebook a moment ago, about an hour ago, which is on the which is my little clip what I talked about. Read what I said there, because I gave a speech to the Policy Forum, one of the keynote speeches, and whereupon I said, and I reported these kind of things, the concern I had about assessment, and I was approached by the Welsh Government quietly and said, well, the Minister would like to talk to you about your concerns. Would you like to come along to see us? And I said, no, you can come and see us. You can come see me. I said, but the truth is, if you take away the idea of an assessment for children, a robust assessment, you're literally ill-equipping that child and that school with any kind of tools to try and support the child. So, but I was told, audience members, believe it or not, this is true, they came up to me, some of the delegates, and said, we're too frightened to speak out. They were too scared to even criticise. So goodness knows what was going on behind the scenes, but it's extraordinary that in a country like Wales, where there's, we're supposed to be free and democratic, that people were actually coming to a policy forum debate and reluctant and concerned about speaking out. Yep. So I was speaking out. In fact, I was the only person who was speaking out. I'm glad I did, because now I can say I was right.
Well, I'd have much preferred you to be wrong and me to be right, because then well, not just because of that, but because I think more importantly, it would have meant that the law was functioning correctly. And regrettably, I suppose, much like your concern, it doesn't seem to be at the moment, and there's a lot of other concerns we'll come on to. And also, this isn't what I think is important, and as we refer to in each of these slides, this isn't just our views. On the ground, we are seeing some issues, but of course, we are lawyers. People come to us when there are problems. So it is important that we acknowledge that often, much like Charlotte said, we're seeing the thin end of the wedge.
Yeah.
We're seeing the cases that are always difficult to fight. So perhaps our experiences isn't the norm. Perhaps most people are actually finding good practice, which you would like to think. But unfortunately, well, I think from the audience reaction here, but also from the other committees that are who's referenced here, Estin, who's also referenced, it's not just us finding it, it's people
Does
who are
anyone
actually
think it's a good thing?
No!
Oh,
well, a very strong.
Really underestimated how bad it would be.
Well, perhaps.
well,
you did.
I think you're absolutely right there. I mean, I do. I think that, but I said that the jury was out and we will come back in 10 years and see how many negligence claims arise, didn't I? That's what I was saying. I think that the big thing about assessment, in England, you see in the legislation an assessment duty, and then you see in the secondary legislation the requirements of what you do when you go about doing that assessment. None of that exists in Wales.
No. Yeah, and that's exactly what we're seeing in this slide. So previously there was a statutory assessment. Now again, part of it was, of course, it was to capture more pupils. So, of course, if you're capturing those who perhaps could be adequately assessed in school, maybe there was an understandable point. Well, maybe not all pupils, but even when you go up to those who are having local authority plans, it's only a suggestion that they get educational psychology advice. And unfortunately, too often, not in the cases that I'm dealing with and Mike are dealing with, we're seeing that even then, educational psychology advice is very thin on the ground. The problem you have then is there is a lack of efficacy in the approaches recommended. Because, yes, you often find maybe specialist teacher assessments, I see a lot more of those, and that isn't to question or criticize specialist teachers, but there's a reason they're not educational psychologists, like a nurse is not a doctor. They're both beautifully worthy professions, and there's no criticism to either. But you can't go to a nurse for things you can go to a doctor for, because a doctor is qualified to do it. It's the same thing. Specialist teacher is not an educational psychologist. So we are seeing, I think, this issue with, as you say, the identification of needs and the identification of provision.
But also, Chris, the point is that the idea is to try and coordinate views and opinions across the domains of education, health, and social care, for example. If you don't have any kind of proper assessment, how are you ever going to understand what the health needs are, which then forms the foundation for saying, well, actually what your educational needs might be and what your social ramifications are and what services you might require. If you strip out all of those assessment obligations, you leave a child with absolutely nothing. And what I'm really worried about as a lawyer, because I speak also to the ministers if they're watching this back at home, ask yourself, really, think about it. If you don't even assess a child to determine what that child needs, how on God's earth can you expect that child's needs to be met? And how on God's earth can you look optimistically at the future of Wales and say, well, actually, we're going to see a thriving economy with lots of people all being less dependent on the state? We are in a self-perpetuating motion where we're going to create people, causing people to remain in poverty and to live without proper help and services by doing what you're doing. And I want to be equipped to be able to help these people, help parents to say the law is protecting you. I feel disarmed by having a gun that has no bullets. Yeah. That's the truth.
Well, I think that's certainly what's being found in others as well. So when it comes to, so there's also the health board involvement of the ALN Act, which was a new feature. And I think what's also happened there is that, again, confusion and inconsistency reigns very sadly. So what's been noticed by the Senedd Children, Young People and Education Committee as part of its ongoing scrutiny of the ALN system. So it's actually said we need to look at this more closely. And one of the key issues that's arisen is poor cooperation and inconsistent cooperation between health boards in Wales and local authorities in Wales. And this is something I've seen in practice. Section 20 of the ALN Act allows for a referral to be made to health boards in Wales to identify really any service they can provide that is likely to be of benefit in addressing the ALN of the child or young person. Well, of course, really, when you think of likely to be of benefit, that's actually a lower threshold than necessity, because there's lots of things that are likely to be of benefit to someone. But shockingly, despite the wording of the statute being a slightly gentler approach, and maybe, again, going back to early intervention, more about, well, there may be a slight problem now, so let's put something in place proactively and hopefully arrest some of the difficulties that may arise later. What we're finding consistently is Section 20 requests are not being replied to in a timely fashion, despite there being a statutory time limit. They're coming back with saying the child is not known to services. So rather than going through the process of identification of services likely to benefit, they just say, we don't know them, so we're going to do nothing. And even where the child is known, very little is often provided. And again, that's what they're scrutinising. The CYPE committee is actually scrutinising that relationship because they also feel that the statutory duties as envisioned are just not functioning.
And Charlotte, I mean, the thing I'm finding is the moment you appeal, you have no assessment, right? So you have a plan drawn up without any kind of assessment. So what you do is you appeal then to the tribunal and you say, well, actually, I've got all these reports, I've got all these assessments, I've done them all for you, says the parent. And then the local authority then says, oh, well, go and get all these assessments.
We'll go and get our assessments now.
So is it the case that you're actually, I predicted in 2017, we are predicting you're causing a war between parents and the state, and that's exactly what you're doing. So in other words, if you don't go to the tribunal, you'll never get any kind of assessment.
The thing that particularly troubles me is, I mean, you'll hear us draw lots of comparisons between the English system and the Welsh system, and I want to be, like, as quite possibly the only English person in the room, I don't know. I want to be really clear that Wales is a separate country, it is entitled to its own system. The Welsh system did not have to be the same as the English system. What it does have to do is be fit for purpose in terms of meeting the needs of children with SEN or ALN. I am saddened by the fact that there is no statutory right to an assessment by somebody like an educational psychologist, because, I mean, I will say, in England, where there is a statutory right to it, nonetheless, it sometimes doesn't happen. We have seen many plans that have been drawn up without an EP, but you have a remedy for that because you've got a statutory right. You can go to the High Court and you can force, effectively, the local authority to carry out that assessment. And there are many parents who some parents are able to afford. These assessments are expensive, as you all know. Private assessments are very expensive. Some parents are able to afford them. Some parents struggle but are able in some way to manage to find, they're not rich, but they are able to put that money together. There are many people who aren't in that position either. And for those people, it saddens me that there are children with special educational needs who are not going to get an assessment simply because they happen to be born to a family that happens to be in a position where it cannot afford a private assessment of its own. And I do think that that is massively unequal. And I think it is a real shame that has happened.
Yeah, no, it's very, very true. And it's, again, a real shame that it is happening. So on the next slide, we come to, again, this illusion of universal provision, as I've phrased it. Now, the reason why I called it the illusion of universal provision is because the statute makes no reference to universal provision. It doesn't exist. And I'll come on to the importance of the statute in a moment. But in the Senate briefing document, and this is also reflected in Estin's findings as well, and the queries raised by the CYPE, this is from the briefing document, says there appears to have been a shift towards the universal provision to meet children's needs, where previously these needs have been recognised as SEN and special education provision put in place for them. This is despite the definition of ALN being essentially the same as SEN. So this is back to our spot the difference. However, the shift away from the ALP towards universal provision for many learners who had previously been regarded as having SEN was not something publicly anticipated by the Welsh Government. It's a curious phrasing, that, publicly anticipated. It almost implies that they privately anticipated. But I actually don't think they anticipated it at all, actually, to credit to the Welsh Government.
I'm not giving them any credit.
Well, I think genuinely they did predict, and their numbers were, basically, well, there's 110,000, I think they said, learners with SEN, both with statements and without statements, and they anticipated that number would transpose immediately, one-to-one, into ALN.
These officers are about a mile or so away from the Senate.
Yeah.
And I invited the minister to come here and talk to me about the things that I was predicting. They couldn't be bothered to even do that. Yeah. So publicly, but they might say that, but privately they knew that, let's be frank.
And so this is interesting as well, because obviously Estin has found this in its investigation into the implementation. These are all publicly available documents. September 2023 was the first of Estin's publications. It's doing a second round of consultations and investigations now as well to be published in the future. But it also found this reference to universal provision. And I think all of us in practice here and those here who've dealt with the system have definitely heard this word. It's come up a few times already. And the recent Senedd petition debate, which is about the petition at the start, an MS actually read out a statement from the President of the Education Tribunal of Wales, who's Judge Jay McConnell, who's a very experienced judge in England and in Wales, which confirmed her view that universal provision has no status in law and should not be used as a means to deny pupils from being defined as having ALN or receiving an IDP. And that's absolutely spot on. Now, one of the reasons why universal provision doesn't exist, is because when you look at, and we'll go back to the statutory definition momentarily, it says, and this is why, and we'll come on to as well with inconsistent practice, which is the next slide, why it's dangerous to put in phrases that you cannot define and are not defined in law, because it leads to utter confusion and exactly what Charlotte said, this informal arrangement of we can meet needs without a plan. That is contrary to the entire design of the system that was made by the Parliament, by the Welsh Parliament, by the Senedd. So when you look at the words in the Act, no one knows what universal provision is. No one knows. I've asked so many local authority workers, and they just say, things that the school can do within its own resources, which is actually, previously, going back to that necessity threshold, it's not what ALN is or ALP is. So when we look at what ALP is, I'll read it out again. Additional learning provision for a person aged 3 or over means educational or training provision that is additional to or different from that made generally for others of the same age in mainstream schools. That is key, because they seem to think universal provision is something, or anything, more accurately, anything that a mainstream school can do. That's never been the definition of special education provision or additional learning provision. If you give a child an extra hour of literacy a week, that is ALP. Simply
Exactly
is.
right.
You're not giving it to all the children. It's not made generally for those in Wales. It's additional learning provision.
Exactly right.
Now, it's not hard to do. It's easy to do within resources. That's why you have a school-maintained IDP.
It's not even hard to understand, is it?
And that's the point, is when the words on the statute are easier to understand than the words in your policy is wrong. Yeah. That is the simple truth of the matter. And the jargon that's been implemented, I think, only precludes schools from understanding what's required, parents from understanding what's required, and more importantly, parents from actually implementing or fighting for the rights of their children, because there's this constant fictitious implementation of this universal provision. It's what's made generally. It's really simple to understand. How many kids are you doing this for in the class? 4. How many kids you got in the class? 30. There you go, it's ALP. Next question. It's really not difficult. And by putting in these new phrases, we're just confusing everyone. And this is where we're seeing, as we anticipate, that this is the key cause. And it seems to be the openly stated cause for the reduction in SEN pupils, because they're still there. And the whole benefit of this system was that they were then going to have enforceable rights. It was not just going to be under the Equality Act, which is what pupils in England still have to do if they don't have an EHC plan. It's all about reasonable adjustments. Here in Wales, it was, we're going to do better than that. We're going to give them a statutory plan. That plan's going to be clear and enforceable, so everyone knows where they stand. And what we have instead is, I think, Mike, we gave a few analogies to how this law in Wales is. I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing with the statistics is they're like me at university when my parents came up to visit me. The room was very clean, but if you open the cupboard, it was filled with all my stuff. And it's very much the case here, isn't it? They are regrettably trying to sweep the needs of these learners under the carpet rather than do what the law says, identify, embrace them, and meet them. That's really what it was all about. And it is a crying shame. So,
and for audience members in England, be concerned, because that's precisely the idea behind safety valve. Exactly that.
Yeah.
The distinction, of course, is that in England, what you require additional to, different from, is the criteria that governs whether you should get a plan or whether there should be an assessment with a view to getting a plan,
Yes,
the HCP plan. Whereas we're looking at the idea, of course, is they picked up on this loose, what I call lazy language, to try and argue that if you have whatever needs that you might have, you don't need any more support than what the school is so resourced to be able to provide. That's the methodology behind it. That's the reality. The sad thing is it's failing, fundamentally failing.
Yep. And when we move on now to the next point, is inconsistent understanding and implementation on the law. So again, this is going back to that September 2023 Estin publication. It's about, I think, 71 pages, so it's very detailed. It does identify some good practice, but it did identify key issues with inconsistent practice, which again, I think many people, both here and at home, will be familiar with. So it talked about a lack of consistency and understanding of certain terms. And I think it is telling, much like with universal provision, which is one of those terms, that none of them are in the statute. And this is the phrases universal, targeted, or specialist provision. And this terminology has apparently been designed, and I don't know who designed it, who's responsible. I think they have a lot of explaining to do. But the reality is that these terms have arisen, I think in part because it was known that this was going to create a huge administrative burden for schools, possibly local authorities, but I think more so for schools, because local authorities have also pushed down a lot of plans that were previously held by them as statements to schools as well. And so they've devised these phrases that I have not been able to find clear definitions for, and clearly Estin haven't either, of these phrases. And essentially what they're trying to do is tranche what provision is. So they're trying to essentially say that perhaps specialist might be ALP, but universal or targeted provision is not. And as we've just read back from the statute, we've come across it twice today, it doesn't matter. You can call it, if it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. If it's different to that made generally for other pupils of the same age in mainstream schools in Wales, it's ALP. I don't care if you call it universal. I don't care if you call it galactic. I don't care what the heck you call it. It's still ALP. And at the moment it's ALP, and provided they also fulfill the other criteria under ALN, so having learning difficulties or disabilities. As we say, there are those who may have ALP, such as those with English as a second language, that wouldn't have ALN because it is additional learning provision, but it's not for the reason of learning difficulty or disability. It's because of they're learning the language. But it is still meeting the criteria and needs to be there. Charlotte?
Yeah, so there's an element, I would say, of, so for example, I have a 6-year-old, and she's in a cohort that is in varying different stages of learning to read. And some of them are reading at required level, some of them are reading ahead of required level, and some of them are currently slightly behind, but they are of an age where that is within the realm of normal, okay? And so for those kids, you might say, let's give these kids a little bit of extra help with phonics or something like that. That's probably not ALP. Okay, so there is a grey area, but not like this, okay? And I think the problem that you see as a barrister, it's very simple for me, because if somebody says to me, oh, this child isn't on the SEN register because she's getting universal provision, I can say, just as Chris said, I don't care what you call it, how many other children are getting it, and why is she getting it? Because if the answer is we think she's dyslexic, or we think she has ADHD, or she's showing signs of autism, then, as Chris says, for me, that's very straightforward. Well, that's additional learning provision. If you think there is a special... Because remember, I think it's the same under the Welsh Act, you don't need a formal diagnosis, okay? No. A formal diagnosis is nice because nobody can argue with it. But you don't need one. You just need to have clear signs, clear evidence that you have a child who has got additional learning needs, okay? If everybody in a school, if all of the teachers are looking at your child and saying, this child is dyslexic, you don't need the diagnosis. It would be nice to have the diagnosis. It's strategically helpful to have it. But as a matter of law, you don't need it. And I think the concern that I have is that for parents who do not have access to fancy lawyers and do not have the time to go off and burrow around the various websites, very helpful websites that will help you with all of this but take a long time to read, they do not know when the local authority's education officer says, oh, well, your child's getting universal provision. That sounds like the law. That's the concern that I have. It sounds like the law and it's not.
Very much so. Charlotte, I'm going to actually give give you the good news. You were bang on about the lack of diagnosis. In fact, Charmaine, if you take us back to slide 4, I can even show you how right you were.
There we go.
There you go. Here's one. It's like Blue Peter. Here's one I prepared earlier. On the top right, it says, a person has additional learning needs if he or she has a learning difficulty or disability, brackets, whether this learning difficulty or disability arises from a medical condition or otherwise.
Yeah.
So again, the Welsh government was so prepared, they put it, that's in the statute. I've not added that bracket. That's actually in the law as it is written. So not only, as Charlotte correctly says, is that already true in England, it was already true in Wales under the old Act as well. They took the time to make this explicit. So why then are we in this situation, as you say, where despite the fact it should be clearer than ever before who has ALN, we're losing kids who already met that definition when it had a different name? It doesn't
I guess
make any
the
sense.
devil's advocate argument is that does it matter? Because ultimately, whether the child's getting provision to meet that needs, I'm being the devil's advocate now, why worry? You know, that's the argument that's going to be used against us, isn't it? That, okay, well, it may not meet that definition, but your child's getting 2 hours extra dyslexia provision and so on. What do you say about that?
It reminds me, I think it was a play originally, but and I think then it was a film, and then it was a remade film with Tom Hanks about 20 years ago now called The Lady Killers. And it's about a robbery of a casino. And basically, they get found out by this old lady whose house they're staying in. Well, they robbed this casino. And she says, it's immoral what you're doing. And he says, well, after you run through everything, we're going to rob this casino. The casino takes money from people. The casino's very well insured, and the insurance has insurance and all this. And by the time it's all said and done, there will only be $1 lost by one person. He said, and that will make us a lot richer though, and everyone else will have their money. So is that really immoral? And much like the old lady there, I say to you, well, it's the law. Whether it's right or wrong, whether you say, well, is it okay if they're having sport or not? Well, why write the law and not enforce it? It's pointless. You may as well have written it a different way. You've written rights for children in Wales. The children should realise those rights. I don't care, much like the old lady didn't care, if it's 1 cent, if it's $1, or if it's a child who doesn't have a plan but still gets the support met. Well, I mean, that's the rosy view. But the reality is, if the rights are there, the rights are there, and the law is the law, much like it was in that film.
And fundamentally, though, it comes down to whether the provision that your child requires is, in fact, going to be delivered, and whether you have any rights to enforce its delivery. Exactly. And if you don't end up with a statutory or like a legal document that you can use to enforce, then, of course, you're pretty much ill-equipped. I mean, the other problem you're going to get, and we're seeing, is that I see this all the time. In England and Wales, a local authority will say, well, your child's going to get all the needs that they require, all the provision they require, in the school or in the unit, let's say, and they have a plan saying it, even with a plan. And then how often do you see those plans then not being adhered to? And they're not. And we're finding a huge disparity between what's being told, parents are being told at, I would have said the assessment stage, of course there's no assessment stage in Wales, but what parents are being told when they're fighting the councils about these things, and what ultimately they'll end up getting. You see a big disparity. There are occasions where, I've heard of cases where people have been told they're going to get specialist teaching in this particular place or therapy in this particular place, and it turns out it's not actually there, or they may have been there when the eyes of the courts and the lawyers were on it, but it disappeared immediately after that. So if you don't end up getting I suppose the platform for which you get your plan is the correct interpretation of the definition of ALN. If you interpret that correctly, that's the next stage to get your plan. But my biggest problem is the assessment. If I had to say what the number one problem I have with all of this is the absence of the assessment.
Absolutely. So turning to the future then. So, sorry, I realised, Charmaine, I've given you a hard job now to catch up where we were. Okay, so at the recent Senate debate, it was reflected, and the representative of the government seemed to hear the concerns about the inconsistent practice. I mean, again, it's good that they heard it and acknowledged it, and I think that shows the importance of that petition, because as Mike says, it's been quite difficult, I think, to get the ministers in Wales to listen to us. I think for some reason, I mean, ironically, I don't think they seem to get that it would be worse for our business if the system was working correctly. I don't know why they seem to think we have some kind of axe to grind by making it work better, because if it worked well, people need our services less and we can take a holiday or something, Mike, I don't know. But the reality is we just want the system to work, but they've often been sceptical, I think, of us and other commentators in the profession. So it's really good that the petition seems to have at least allowed it to be
I was
heard.
accused of scaremongering. Do you remember back in 2007?
You were.
Remember that?
I remember that.
I think the minister, I've forgotten who the minister was.
I can't remember.
But I was accused of scaremongering.
No,
Sorry?
it was prior to her. It was prior to
I was
her.
prior to her. I was accused of scaremongering. I mean, why on earth would I want a scaremonger? You know,
Yeah.
I don't do this job because I need to anymore. I do it because I want to. That's the honest truth. You know, I love this job and I love representing and seeing the results that you achieve. I'm more about, I'd rather, in all honesty, I'd rather go and transfer and do some other law, if need be. I don't want to have to do this all the time. But it angers me that I have to. I would like to be on a cruise now. Actually, I'm going to Japan next week. If you're actually wondering where I am next week, I'm in Japan.
There you go. My goodness.
I'm going to see how it is.
It's now been said to the world you're in Japan.
Do you know what?
We've heard this for months.
I'm going to find out some more about Tokyo because I was actually watching, I'm going on digressing, but I was actually reading about it and how different it was and how much better it was in Japan.
Well, you'll get
Have
to
a look.
tell us.
Have a
You'll
look
get to tell
about
us on your
that.
way
I'll
back.
tell you about it on the
in the
next
in the next episode, where Charlotte and I will not be appearing, Mike will tell you all about it. But going on, so there is still the Estin's second part of their investigation into the implementation of the Act. So obviously, we can only hope that some of the concerns that have already been raised maybe start to be addressed and new practices and supports implemented to help by the time the second report comes out. The CYP is continuing its scrutiny for this next session, it says. So that's, again, an ongoing level of scrutiny. So, of course, the hope very much is that now that through petitions, through other awareness, through campaigning that I'm sure a lot of the parents listening today will have been a part of, hopefully we will see some maybe clearer guidance come out or better training for local authorities and schools in the implementation. So maybe perhaps these inconsistent practices we're seeing are taken away. We can only live in hope. But it is ongoing, is all I can say. And with regard to the individual cases, and this is also very important, the Education Tribunal for Wales continues to have jurisdiction over appeals relating to the implementation of the Act for the individual child. So where a right of appeal arises, you can appeal to the Education Tribunal for Wales as well. So do remember that for your child, that's your most direct route to having direct scrutiny on the situation that you're facing. So that is important to bear in mind. Obviously, these wider changes are more about the systemic implementation of the Act. However, whether or not it's been a case that you've received an adverse decision that your child does not have ALN, you can then take that up to the local authority and then on to the tribunal if necessary. Likewise with the contents of the IDP, okay? So it is important that for the individuals, there is still that right of scrutiny under the tribunal as well, okay? So that's important to distinguish the kind of general issues of implementation we've talked about, whereas there is a mechanism on the individual scale to go up to the tribunal. Okay, so we're going to move on now just to some discussion, I think, of some practical guidance. And I also believe as well, while we're doing this practical guidance, there were some questions, I think, floating around, or I think people were writing questions.
There's something being waved at the back.
Okay, well, we'll have Lindsay bring those down shortly for us to do in the next slide. But before we do, Charlotte, we'll come to you first. Any practical guidance you'd like to give children or people in their families in light of what we've heard today?
I think just really fix in your minds as parents what the key things are that need to be established for your child to have access to the help that they need. That's the most important starting point. Just remember that the thing to do is if you think your child has additional learning needs and the school or the local authority appear to disagree or are non-committal, but your child is also getting something extra, just ask them, why are you giving my child this? Why do you think my child needs this? And how many other children are getting it? That's the easiest starting point that I can think of. Because, there is this conception of lawyers that we like to dress everything up in fancy language, but 99% of the law is just common sense. Those are the two questions that it all boils down to. And then you can think about what you can do in terms of getting specialist teachers involved, in terms of getting other experts involved. And what you can do is always going to depend on your financial resources, your family resources, your emotional resources. Do what you can. And look for help where there's stuff that you think needs to happen that you can't do. There are lawyers who can help you. There are many charities that will help you. Okay, you're not without options.
What charity?
I know that it is very different in Wales.
Because what charities in Wales?
Yeah. So,
Can I say something here? I'm glad you mentioned charities. The problem, I love what you said there. The problem is the information is not there. There's nowhere to get the information. We're told the information is there. It's up in the sky. Where? Who do you talk to? The people who are in position, who have positioned themselves as the experts, absolutely do not know what they're talking about. So you have a family or you have a person who knows what's wrong with their child, knows what to ask for, go to, and I support families. I'm a charity myself and being a parent. And I've signposted them to people where by the time they go and come back to me, I spend my time doing damage control than actually what I send them there to do. And I'm having to coach them and tell them what to do. So the problem is we are having a lot of what I call clipboard professionals who wear the glasses and carry the board, have no clue what they're talking about. So a lot of families go there and they don't have anything. And I now what we've done, I've gone from creating a charity to support, and now I'm actually doing a little bit of law by going into the meetings with families. And I spend an hour talking to the school on what to do for the child. I'm not even a specialist. I'm just using my lived experience to just tell them basic things in order to help the family. And we're seeing a lot of that now.
I think it's encouraging that a local authority has let you into the meeting.
I have to
I
admit,
can tell you now, because the other thing I find,
saying-
I can't get into any Welsh meeting because no one wants to see me.
Yeah, but do you know why?
I wonder why.
No, but do you know why? It's your profession that is making them not. I'm just a parent. I'm just a charity. So it's easy for them to go, okay, let me in. And then they take my name, and then you get them calling me, and the other way around. It's like, I can go into those meetings because the parents have given me consent to be there. And I can only talk like a mediator. I can't be seen to side anybody.
Do you know, Charlotte, it's interesting this, because I think that people have this idea that, local authorities can be quite scared of lawyers coming along and coming to meetings, because I don't know how many meetings I've gone to where I've unearthed some real problems, not in the child's provision and the schools. I got to tell you, schools are not our enemy. Schools are really trying their best, the majority of them. They are, but the problem is that we're seeing that they are being forced to toe a county line, and they're trying to they're being muted and so on. But I got to say, lawyers are given bad press, let's be honest, because, or at least I think that's what the councils want to say. But we also resolve cases.
we do. A lot of our work is bringing people
We are
together.
very skilled at resolving cases, saying, look, actually, let's try and find a happy medium here. The school's got this problem. You've got that problem. The council says this. Okay, you haven't got any money, council. That's what they often say. We haven't got the money. School says this. Parent, you're being a little bit unreasonable there. Why can't we find some happy medium? We do that all the time to find a solution.
It's the label, because when I go into the meeting, the first thing I say is, hello, my name is from my
But do you know what we're very good at?
charity.
Do you know what we're very good at?
Yeah,
What?
We're very good at unearthing lies.
exactly. Well,
That's one thing we're very good at.
I cannot tell them they're lying though, because I'm trying to find a win-win. Like
Well,
when I go in,
can I say you're right, because at the end of the day, what you want is a solution.
it's a solution.
And I can tell you now that from my perspective, if I'm able to settle a case for somebody and find something that nobody is 100% happy with, but everybody comes out of with more than they thought they were going to get, that's a really good day for me.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm not going to say, every lawyer goes into the job, every barrister goes into the job wanting to go into court and fight, but the better result for everybody is always if you can agree something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So by a show of hands, can anyone today say, and if you're watching at home, please post your message on social media, but does anyone say that they've had a positive experience since the ALN Act has come about? I'd be very interested to know. If so, please post, because I really want to see what the positive experience is. Does anyone here today? Anyone raise your hand?
We've got a hand.
One person.
We've got
one
a hand.
person.
Well, that's
Lovely.
great news.
Good.
I don't know.
Okay.
I've had a very slow experience, but we're getting where we need to get.
Okay.
And the person that I have,
Do you know what you need to get?
yes,
Okay.
So have you got an assessment?
yes.
Oh,
So
good.
we've been through all that
Okay.
slowly.
Yeah.
But we have had a positive experience with the people we've come into contact with in the council.
That's
we
good.
have an inclusion transition worker who's really supportive.
Good.
Eventually,
Good.
so it took a long time to get to her.
Okay.
And then they did try to offer us a school that was very unsuitable. But that's one of my questions actually. It may come up. But we knew what we were trying to get, so we kept pushing, and now we've just been offered it. But we don't know in the long term whether it will be right. But it's taken only a year, but we've got to where we hope to be.
Well, that's
Is that positive? I
Michael
don't
said
know.
about early intervention, this taking years for people.
yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so you're
absolutely.
who's suffering.
I'm not quite sure whether that's a. I mean,
I'm not sure you
I'm
see-
pleased that you're not absolutely, enraged, but I'm a bit concerned that you are maybe a bit battle hardy, perhaps, maybe worn down, but you shouldn't have had to wait for a year, should you? So that is
Well,
evidence of it not working. isn't
Well,
it?
put it this way. I think that it is good news. I'm glad to hear that you're getting where you need to go. I mean, obviously for us, when we know the statutory time limits, and of course the whole point was it'd be shorter, it's been long. But it is good to hear that you found a worker at the council that you get along well with. That's so important. I've seen them as well. I mean, Kate Bolton, who's retired from the Vale now, I'll name her because my sister's got severe learning difficulties, and she had to interact with my mum and sister, and even when I first came into the profession, she was still working. We had a chat, and she was always, every parent says she was very friendly, she would listen, and of course, she still worked for the local authority. Some of the communication she gave wasn't always what parents hear, but they always felt like she was a willing listener, and I think that's also really important. And, obviously, as you say, you found someone now you feel is capable, and that's so crucial, because if there were more people like that, then there would be less need for arguments. So I have been given a little note about time, so we are going to have to move on to questions. But thank you very much to everyone who has brought in
Really
their questions.
quickly before you do.
Oh, please do.
I hadn't realised, so I have learned something today. There are a number, as I think you're probably aware, there are a number of well-established charities offering send advice in England. I hadn't realised that they don't cover Wales, so I'm a bit chastened by that.
We have no support in Wales.
Yeah.
You have SNAP who won't support you. Nobody will support you going to tribunal unless you have finance.
But do you know what? Do you know what that is? But do you know what the other thing is? That shows just how poorly scrutinised Welsh bills are, because one of the big advocates to change the law when it was at bill stage in the 2014 Children and Families Act was the charities speaking up. The scrutiny that the English legislation went through to ensure this level of prescription, we don't see it in Wales. There isn't that kind of voice in Wales. It's left to individual parents or people like myself who are accused of scaremongering. And you end up being a voice in the wilderness, because you actually start questioning yourself. Is it just I that feels so pessimistic about it? I got to say, I confess, I did actually start feeling that in 2017. I was so pessimistic about the legislation. I started thinking, am I wrong? Have I missed something?
Well, I mean, to be fair, I think when it first came out, it was quite difficult. This sort of school to local authority plan approach all the way through was very confusing, and I think a lot of people were just trying to get their heads around it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris, you carry on with the
No,
question.
that's okay. No, thank you very much. So thanks everyone who provided us questions. We're only going to have time for a few. I'm sorry we won't have time to answer everyone's questions. For those of you here in person, I'm sure you can bend our ears maybe a little bit later as well after the production has ended. Okay, so I'm going to put this actually to Charlotte. So what should a case statement include for tribunal, especially when EOTAS is required for a child? And then they've been advised the tribunal don't like EOTAS requests.
that is true, and it is also true, lest we've been sort of painting England as some kind of amazing promised land where everything is a lot easier. It's also true in England. Tribunals like children to go to school if it's possible. So the first thing I would say with the EOTAS is proceed on the basis that you're going to have an uphill struggle, because you are. And it's understandable because I think we could, I've never met the parent who comes in at the starting point with, I don't want my child to go to school, I want my child to be tutored at home. I don't meet that parent, okay? Generally speaking, people get to that point after they have realised that there is no, they've exhausted all available options for schools they're not aware of anymore. So you start by bearing in mind that the test for EOTAS, generally speaking, is going to be, is it effectively just not possible for your child to be educated in school? If it's possible for your child to be educated in school, then you probably will not get EOTAS. So I think you really need to focus on exactly what needs your child has that make school unbearable for. So social anxiety is very possible. Is there a history of school refusal? Have there been previous incidents of school-based trauma? Has your child had treatment from any experts who might be able, if your child's had counselling or even seen the GP or a paediatrician, to include some evidence from them in the form of a statement explaining what their view is about your child going to school. And I think you also need to be really, really granular about how you have tried to get your child. List every school that your child has attended. Some of my clients, their children will have been to 5 or 6 schools and had poor starts and then had to leave. And it becomes, like how many times do you need to try it before it becomes clear that it is the school that is the school as a concept that is the problem. Yeah. So that's what you really need to direct it to, not just here are a series of schools that have failed, but here are the schools we tried, here are the other schools that we have looked at that are not suitable or who have said no, and then the problem is school. Here is why my child cannot do school. If at all possible, you need to support it with expert evidence. Sorry.
Can I add just to that? Thank you for that, because I really needed to hear that. I do have some families where the parents have been banned from the school.
Yeah.
In addition to that, so like they have to kind of like stand outside the gate to try and get help for their kids and looking for EOTAs. I mean, while they're fighting to do what you're saying, and then now they themselves have been banned.
Isn't it awful that we are living in a world?
Because I've got like 3 families.
Yeah.
Isn't it awful that we live in a world where we have to use our children as pawns so that we have to demonstrate the trauma that they've gone through and the pain and suffering that they've experienced in order to try and gain anything? I'm a great believer, and I think you gave excellent advice, Charlotte, may I say, but I'm a great believer in a parent being treated with the level of respect that they require, and that is that they know their child. Yeah. They know what they have to face. We see frequently contrasts of behaviour when a child is at school versus where a child is at school. And we see often schools saying to parents, your child's fine at school. Yeah. And the parents say, well, actually, he's battering hell out of me at home. There's going to be a podcast I'm doing on a case in Ireland. The reason I'm doing it, and I'm going to tell you about it, and you'll see the clip, it is harrowing. I carefully thought about whether I should use this clip because it's so harrowing, because I felt so much pain for the family. But they were being expected to put that child into a mainstream school. And just may I say, the reason I went to Ireland was to try and understand what was happening there and whether it was better or worse than it is actually in England. It's part of the preparations I'm doing for today. But the story that what that parent has had to go through on a day-to-day basis, where the child is hammering the mother to a point, it's desperate, and yet she is told mainstream, mainstream, mainstream. Now, the problem is that if you say, well, actually, is the child going to school? Yes. Is the child learning? Well, according to school, yes. But is the child creating an absolute nightmare for everyone at home? Is the child, let's say, safe? The mother's safe? Is home life right? If we take a view that education is purely about one compartment, about how your child focuses and responds to lessons, we are failing to understand what education actually is. Education, let me be clear, is the demonstration of skill that you can apply beyond that classroom. So you can live a life like everybody else, and you don't go home and you batter hell out of your parent. You don't go home and you become depressed and isolated and don't want to go back. Education, if it's really good, useful and it's working, you will see it enriching lives. It doesn't create problems like that. When you have problems like that, in your case statement, focus on it. Hammer it, hammer down and say, my life at home is hell. This is what I'm going through. I think you have to show realism, and that's what we want.
But
Well,
isn't it cheaper and easier just to parent blame?
Well, I mean, that's another
so-
topic, and I've talked about parent blaming. I mean, we're seeing parent blaming already, aren't we, by saying what we said, what the minister said, for example. That's parent blaming.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to mediate here and call time. Thank you. Just to touch upon what Charlotte said earlier, and
You answer the next question, then, Chris.
I think I might need to. Just touch on what Charlotte said, though, about case statements in EOTAS. The threshold, and this goes back to your earlier point about simple words, the threshold is like it is in England, it's inappropriate. It's inappropriate for the provision to be made at school. And that's exactly what Charlotte said. You want to put the evidence that it's inappropriate at school and the reasons why, and often liaising with, going back to your experiences with evidence of what's happened at school is the best way. Okay, I think we've only got time for one more question because of the spirited debate here that's been ongoing. But okay, so we have, I think I'll put this one to you, Mike, although if you can answer in less than 5 minutes, I'd be grateful. It says that why are local authorities who shall remain anonymous removing all one-to-ones, even if there's one-to-ones within the child's statement? And what can we do to prevent our children's one-to-ones being removed when transferring to IDPs?
This is a problem that's happening. It happened in 2014 when the Children and Families Act came about, when the statements evolved into education healthcare plans. We're seeing this happening again in IDPs, where statements are saying one-to-one and then it's being diluted down the line with an IDP because, again, universal provision, you don't need it, you know. But I guess, I suppose, I might have a slightly different view to maybe many others about one-to-ones. I mean, one-to-one, I think, is good and it's necessary, but it's often misunderstood about what the actual objective behind a one-to-one actually is. The objective of one-to-one is to support the teaching. It's not there to substitute the teaching. It's not there to Velcro a person to a one-to-one in order they think, well, actually, that's all going to be fine because that one-to-one is the only person you're ever going to make that child survive at school. I think if you're in that situation, I wouldn't want that one-to-one. I'd be looking at something completely quite different. If you are advocating an approach where your child can only go to school because there's a one-to-one, then I'd be saying, well, actually, you might want to think about whether the school's right. Should you be going to a more special school? Maybe we should be looking at EOTAS, things like that. So I suppose I come back to the point I made, Chris, that parents know their children the best. If you think your child needs one-to-one, then obviously you say, well, actually, where's the evidential foundation for saying this one-to-one is no longer needed? And I think you'll often find that, for example, children with different profiles like dyslexia, dyslexics will often have memory impairments. They'll have working memory impairments. And so what you'll often have is a need for regular instruction reinforcement. Children with language impairment will actually need language broken down, and they will struggle with keeping up to the pace of the classroom. So they will need someone to help break that language down, reinforce the instruction. If your child's in that situation and really benefiting from the one-to-one, really genuinely needing it, then I'd be saying that we'll fight for it. That's the answer, really, Chris.
Yeah. Absolutely right. And if it was already in the statement, as is in the case with this example, then, as Mike said, unless there's new evidence to the contrary, it should be being transposed over to the IDP. If it's not, then you can appeal that, obviously, to the tribunal. And, of course, then you can highlight that in the statement, the evidence showed that it was there, that it was there, and now it's being removed and no rationale is for removed. So then that kind of puts the local authority to proof as to why this decision has been made. So that's, again, where the tribunal will fall.
Across Wales is that there are no longer one-to-ones.
But it's just
don't
written
do that
differently.
anymore under the new Act. That's what they're being told.
Well, that's
and it's across counties.
That's not true.
That is not.
It's not put in as one-to-one, it was put in as group support, individual support, so then enhanced support.
But
and
I mean,
then
this is
parents are confused.
all. I know you know this already, But this is all semantics, okay? There's only one statutory concept, and that is additional learning provision, and that can be anything. That can be a one-to-one, that can be speech and language therapy, that can be occupational therapy, that can be a dyslexia intervention, that can be social stories, that can be mental health provision, it can be sensory breaks, anything that you do for a child who's got additional learning needs that you're not doing for other children because they need it to meet those needs as additional learning provision. So don't be bamboo. I mean, I have some sympathy with local authorities using a bit of jargon to arrange their provision, but it's all additional learning provision, and you get it to meet your kids' needs.
Can I ask another
Simple
question?
as that.
As a matter of interest, again to the audience watching at home and to my friends here today. Have you ever had an NHS therapist, whether it be occupational therapy or speech therapist, ever telling you that your child needs direct speech and language or direct occupational therapy? I'd be interested to know, because I think it's an amazing thing.
You know the answer.
That therapists,
You know the answer to that.
entrusted by the state, in other words, providing reports for the NHS service, I don't think I've ever seen a report saying the child, well, I think I may have one or two.
I
We
have.
have in fairness. Rarely, I should say, do I see a report saying that the child needs direct speech and language or any...
Assessments and reports only ever suggest or recommend things that the local authority are willing to pay for.
Yes, they work together nicely.
And I think
They do not recommend
as well
things that are going to cost.
Or that the local
Not
NHS
require
can provide.
It's Elencos to be qualified.
Yeah.
So most Elencos are not
Are not
qualified. In England, they have to be qualified.
Yeah.
So, one thing I would say for a bit of balance, I saw one 2 weeks ago on a case that I did.
When I was actually saying it, well, actually, Chris, when I was actually saying it, you're right.
Yeah.
I have seen a few, but it's rare. It's
Yeah,
not
it is
often.
rare.
It's
No,
the-
it is
I mean, and because a lot of these assessments are undertaken by against the criteria of functional skill. In other words, if your child can go into and make himself, I don't know, a sandwich or whatever, and go about their day-to-day life, and they can walk and they can talk, that's all that matters. They're functioning. Whereas speech and language therapy, I was talking to a specialist teacher the other day, and I asked the question about, do you honestly believe that the children in your school are getting sufficient therapy, for example? And they said, well, we are skilled, and don't get me wrong, I respect this teacher. I respect this teacher tremendously, I've got to say. We are skilled, but there are children in our school who can hardly speak, and they will not get speech therapy.
See, what I was funnily enough, I was going to say, where I have seen NHS therapists recommend direct, it will be for categories. So, for example, if you have a child who has speech production difficulties, you will, in England at any rate, you will probably get some direct to help with that difficulty. But otherwise, it tends to be we will assess your child, we will write a programme for your child, and then the staff within the school will administer it. And for many children, that may meet need. Those are not the parents we meet, because we meet the parents of children whose needs do not fit into those categories and they need something more bespoke. Are you twitching? You're twitching.
No, sorry. I'm just always
He's just
twitching.
like a gigantic alarm clock.
I mean, I suppose this is bringing the presentation to a close. And please, obviously, remain here because we've got some coffee and tea and so on. We can chat to.
And we'll be milling about. So you can talk to us.
I suppose the point that I made earlier a few times about the legislation. I'm sorry to say, I really am sorry to say, if you're watching this at home, I don't really feel I have a lot of ammunition in the Welsh legislation to do the things I can do for you if you were living in England. And I'm not trying to advocate you go off to England and live in England, right?
Everyone moves to Hereford.
Don't get me wrong, there's problems there. But I got to say, if you can compare the legislation and you can compare the provision that exists in England versus what it exists in Wales, there's a stark difference, a really stark difference. And if you can compare what I can do for you if you were needing help, legal help in England, versus what I can do for you needing legal help in Wales, there is a stark difference. Let's be honest. I mean, what really frustrates me about this presentation and, looking at this and revisiting the legislation as I have for the purposes of today, is that you're looking. I think it was back in 2001 or so, where the government in England changed the law to enable appeals against state annual reviews, say, and there was you may remember the learning and skills provision whereby the Learning Skills Act came out in 2000, and it was meant to be about helping support young people into the college and the specialist sector. We see that we saw the problems that created in England, because predominantly the decisions were being made by the executive body rather than by a thorough evaluation and assessment and checks and balances that are required for that. But we've been waiting for this legislation in Wales for a long, long time. The people of Wales have been waiting. They've been waiting to appeal the contents of a plan. They've been waiting for post-16 and post-18s to have the benefit of educational services beyond the age of school, so that they can go to a tribunal and fight their case rather than be reliant on principles of judicial review. They've been waiting for years when this provision has been changed in England. Let's be honest, in 2014 when the law changed in England. I was waiting for this train. I said at the end of my note back in 2017, I've been waiting for this train to arrive. I've been waiting for the train of provision to help you all to get support. And I'm sad to say that if this now is the train that we've said we've arrived at the destination, it's in ruins. Let's be honest. I don't want to mince my words. I'm really, really worried about the people and the young people in Wales. I really think you're being badly served by an executive that is failing to even implement the changes of the law that it itself promoted in 2018. For example, post-16 people today, children in schools today who are coming about transition, are still reliant on archaic pieces of legislation. And buried in the material, let me say, there is guidance that says you're limited to 2 years support. So beyond 16, you go onto the college sector, and the guidance gives you so many hoops that you're supposed to cross in order to get that provision. I think I'm afraid that, as I say, the train station is in ruins and it needs change. And if it doesn't get changed soon, we all have to go down to the Welsh Assembly offices with our boards, because, to be honest with you, I'm virtually at that point. I feel really frustrated that I have to tell so many people, and I have to tell you today, that as much as I've spent my entire career helping people get in support, I can't do those things that I desperately want to do for you in Wales, because the law is not there enough. It's not prescriptive enough. And you've got a piece of legislation that says, this is the law, and if you want to find the detail, go to a code of practice, which is hundreds and hundreds of pages long. You try and find the answers there. And that's creating more expense for parents who want to get legal advice. It is a mess. I'm not going to mince my words. If you're a minister and you're watching this, if you're a member of the Welsh Parliament, please listen to what I have to say, because I'm on the ground. I'm telling you what's happening. These people are on the ground, and they need answers and they need help fast. And with that, I'd like to thank you.
Are we going to? No.